Alrighty, well, welcome everyone to this month's MSPs in Conversation. Today's topic is on empowering your team, developing leaders for a thriving MSP. And we've got some great panelists today. Many of you will know them already, and we'll get them to introduce themselves in just a second. As a little bit of housekeeping, this is a recorded session, so if you have to drop off or you'd like to share it around later, please feel free to check it out. We cut this up into a podcast. It's on Spotify, Apple, goes onto YouTube, etc., etc. If you've got any questions, throughout for the panelists, please feel free to drop them in the chat and we'll try to answer them as we go. A little bit about Hosted Network. If you didn't know already, we are a wholesale cloud and telco provider for Australian MSPs. So our unique differentiator is simply that we think like an MSP because we started as one 20 years ago. So unlike the telcos that are out there, we help you not to be a telco, but to help you be an actual MSP. So anyway, enough about us. With that in mind, I'm going to let our wonderful panelists introduce themselves. So Paul, James, and Zorn, welcome, guys. Thank you for being here. Paul, can I get you to start off with a quick introduction to yourself and Mangano IT?
Cheers, Ben. Thanks very much, mate. G'day, I'm Paul Mangano. I'm Managing Director at Mangano IT. We are a managed service provider based out of Brisbane. We've got a team of around about 40 people. We design, deliver, and support progressive solutions to improve business outcomes for our customers through secure technology. We're large enough to get it done, but we're small enough to care, is how we like to speak to our customers, because I think it matters. And our differentiators are our depth of partnership, both with our customers, our partners, and our vendors. Our agility, we move quickly, we're ready to adapt, and we're good to get the job done. And of course, we share what we know. So we leverage our investment in our people, our skills, and our knowledge. That's me, Ben.
Awesome. Thank you. James?
Thanks, Ben. Great to be here. Thanks for hosting again. So James Bergel, currently with a new business recently established this year called Bluebird, and I'll explain what we do in just a moment. But my background and history is 15 years in MSP land, in vendor land. I started in 2010 in Europe, came to Australia, had an opportunity to launch Datto here, and then Pax8 more recently. And a passion of mine is in building high-performing sales teams, and that's something when I was looking at going out and venturing to do myself, wanted to stay close to that passion and hopefully skill set as well. And what we do at Bluebird is we work with technology business, whether they're SaaS businesses or high growth MSPs, to help them identify, define their go-to-market goals and ambitions, and we then go and help to hire the right salespeople to help them achieve on those goals and objectives. So we've been in markets for probably 6 or 7 months here in Australia, and really enjoying the new lifestyle and working in an area which is very close to our heart, which is building high performance sales teams.
Awesome. Well, thank you, James. Great to have you here. Zorn?
Hello.
You've been here before as well.
I have. Thank
Welcome
you for
back.
having me back. I always love to be, representing the West Coast for a change, the WA style, the Wait a While guys. Leap Consulting, based out of Perth, 25 staff, been going now for 20 years as an MSP. I think the other guys have done a great job of sharing some background. I'll probably share my involvement outside of the world of MSP as being part of the first kind of Evolve HDG peer group in Australia. Also been around peer groups for a long time, and now also volunteer on the ConnectWise Advisory Council globally, so the Corporate Advisory Council, which I kind of attend and represent all of the Australian ConnectWise partners, as well as the Australian group part of that, which there are some great members, including Paul, where we kind of focus on national issues. So great to be here chatting with these guys and sharing.
Cool. Well, guys, thank you very much. Let's get into it. I'll stop my share, because this is not about slides. This is about hearing your wonderful stories. So guys, today we're talking about developing leaders, right? And there's lots of different types of leaders within an organization, particularly in an MSP. James, you mentioned sales leaders, but we've got tech leaders, all shapes and sizes. But let's start right at the beginning. And I'll throw this one to you, Paul, if that's okay. But in your mind, why is it important to have, back to basics, but why is it important to have strong leadership in your business?
Great question, Ben. And there's a very simple answer. The sooner that you can develop leadership within your organization, the sooner you as an owner can get out of the road and watch your business grow. I think it's not uncommon for IT MSPs to start from nothing. Effectively, in our industry, there's zero barrier to entry, and a lot of MSPs start from maybe uncommon or strange or unusual beginnings quite often. And next thing you know, somebody who has a tech interest finds himself running a business. More often than not, those people are not always naturally leaders. And therefore, as they progress and they're doing great things technically and they start getting a couple of people, they find themselves having to manage and lead people. And of course, that's when things can start to fall apart. So if you do find yourself in that position, then it's important to take a moment and identify if that is indeed something that you as an owner need to work on. And then consider whether it's one or two other people that you might have in your team if you're very small, who perhaps has a better skill set in that space than yourself, and start to look at how you can develop and grow leadership within a team, regardless of how many people there might be in that organization.
Okay, so with that in mind, let's starting back at the beginning, and Zon, I'll throw this one to you. When did you start creating your first leadership team? Tell us the story about your first leader that you identified.
I would say as we were kind of starting off, and our business, there's two business partners, so it was that journey where we already had like a mini leadership team, if you like. I was looking after kind of sales and operations. My business partner was kind of tech, and we were wearing like all the other hats in the business. So that was our first kind of team, and we realized how we operated together was important for the rest of the organization. So I think there's that old cliche, like a fish rots from the head down. And so if my business partner and I weren't aligned, no one else in the business was going to be aligned. It was like mum and dad, like ask this one to get something you want. Don't ask that one if you don't want that. Like that was always common. But I think after that, we started to have one of our engineers who had, it was with us for a very long time, and he started to take ownership. So he started to do more than what was expected. He started to kind of, I would say, lead by example in his own conduct. And so we started to say, hey, that guy, if one of us was away, he was the fallback. So I wouldn't say we had this like masterful plan and it was written down, Ben. I reckon, we probably stumbled forward, and he just kept showing us just through actions more than anything that, okay, he's got something in him that he can handle more responsibility. And he treated the business like his own. And I would say that's a trait that we really looked for. Like, what does this guy think about how he treats the business? And that was kind of our first beginnings with like just identifying someone in the team who cared more than average, showed up more than average, and delivered more than average.
Okay. Paul, back to you for a second. In terms of your story as an MSP, what was your journey like? Bringing in your first leaders.
Very similar, actually. Mangano and Leap are similar in how we started as well, having two partners. In my case, it was with my brother. So I think it's about, to extend on what Zorn's said, because I do agree with it. If we talk about trying to highlight or sort of really pick on certain traits in an individual that will lead to that leadership, I think it's about making sure that they have that a proactive attitude. They need to have some kind of ability to look beyond themselves and what they might be doing, which is what Zorn touched on, is they started doing more than they were supposed to. Of taking initiative, showing resilience in the face of some sort of challenge. Like, okay, when things get too hard, they need to step up, particularly as Zorn said, if they're fronting the business when the owners are away, it's not okay just to go, oh, it's all gotten too hard, I'm going to disappear. What happens when they're faced with a challenge? So, and they're eager to learn and grow. Most good leaders, aren't necessarily born that way. They often develop and they have an interest in what they're doing. And so finding someone that's eager to learn and grow is also quite important, I believe.
Okay. James, you've built some pretty serious teams over the years. What do you look for when you're, setting out to build a leadership team? You've done it a couple of times. I'd say Zorn, Paul, and I have sort of probably only really done it once and then continued scaling it, right? But you've done it a few times.
Yeah, I have. I've done it a few times, and I've done a few iterations within each one of those kind of evolutions. So I use Datto as an example. That we went through multiple kind of waves of building, and I think Luke in the chat just made a really good comment that you could have leaders at any level, and for me, a leader is not a role within the business, and I think that there's still a lot of there's managers and leaders get intertwined incorrectly. I actually think that there are two functions. The way I kind of compartmentalize is that you manage metrics and data and ones and zeros, and you lead people. And the leadership aspect is, in my opinion, is how do you get the most out of those that are around you? How do you get the most out of your team, the business, the greater vision and the good of the entire organization? And I think a good leader is able to give someone the ability to go out there and give them enough rope to hang themselves, in the sense that they've got guardrails, they've got permission to make mistakes, and they can actually be vulnerable in a sense that they know that if they do mess up, then they are not going to be reprimanded too heavily unless it's lacking in integrity. And I think that what we find is that most humans have got superpowers that are outside of the job description, and it's sometimes just about unpacking that person's capabilities over and above what you've necessarily just set. And if you can provide that foundation and that vision, and I say shine the light on how we're trying to get there. And my approach would be, don't, like, this is how I would do it. I don't mind how you want to get there, but like this is the directionally what we're trying to achieve. And I sit back and watch, and sometimes I thought I was good, and I've seen the people around me do it much better. But you've got to give them that capacity and capability and trust to go out there and execute. And I think that if we're humble enough to know that we're not the best ones in the room, then we'll see great things from those around us as well.
Okay. And I might jump in there and
please
extend on something that James just said, and I'd reword it in that James is describing enabling or providing a psychologically safe workplace, right? So he spoke about allowing people to make mistakes without fear of some sort of repercussion, and I think that is actually really important in any workplace. I did another speaking session at another event, and we spoke about that and having sort of preparing for that and looking into that in a fair bit of detail. And the examples that they spoke about are quite important. When it's life and death, which IT is not generally, it's super important. And those examples were crystal clear around particularly arrogant doctors in surgeries, not speaking particularly kindly to nurses and so on, yet nurses have potentially got many more years or just as many years of experience in what they do, when they're very skilled and professional at what they do. So it's important that in that example, that if a nurse knows that part of the human's missing and the doctors missed that, then they need to be able to speak up without any fear. Same thing in an IT business, in any business. When someone is learning, they need to be able to do that in a safe space and feel that they're supported by their leader and manager.
Okay.
Yeah, that was, I forgot what those words were, but psychological safety, absolutely. And there's a book called, there's a book called
Fearless Organization by Amy Edmondson. Edmondson is the one that I read. I don't know whether it was the same.
What was that one? Sorry?
The Fearless Organization by Amy Edmondson, I think. Yes, Edmondson.
I think
there's another one called Black Box Thinking as well, which talks about that very example of having the difference between aviation and medical, and saying that it's actually a lot safer to fly in a plane than it is to be treated by a doctor because of this very reason.
Exactly. Yeah.
Interesting.
I think it was Google. Did you guys see the Google study? Oh, the Google study around leaders. They pulled out that safety, like having a safe environment, Google studied that. Obviously, tech industry for us is very relevant. And so they put a lot of data behind what creates high-performing teams. And, you know, we all want great teams. And so if you just search kind of Google high-performing teams study, there's a whole kind of deep dive rabbit hole you can go down on what it looks like to build that environment in a tech. And they had enough, you know, thousands and thousands of staff to survey. So it's a good example of, like, actually there's some real solid evidence behind kind of the cliches that you might hear or read, or stories actually backed up by science, which is always a good thing for people who want to go down that kind of 0 and 1 thinking.
Yeah, cool. Well, I imagine we're going to have a few different resources. So if you guys think of them throughout the day, I've actually got a question later, and we'll about resources. But
we should
we'll
keep our powder
also
dry, Ben. Is that what you're saying? Like we
Sorry?
should not like keep
No,
our
no, not
powder
at all.
dry.
I'm actually noting them down myself, and we'll send out a list of these at the end of it. So if you do have to drop off or whatnot, we'll send a list of all the resources that we talk about today. I want to talk back to stories. You know, where we've talked really positive things, but you know, developing a leader is, you know, even for ourselves, right, it's a journey. What are some of are there any particular points that you guys can think back to, and, you know, anyone can answer this, that you've stumbled over in creating a leader? Maybe you've put too much expectation on someone and it didn't work. Has anyone got any particular?
I can share an example.
Paul and I can both share for ages on this.
Yeah,
cool. All right, I figured you would. There you go.
Go for it, Zorn.
I'll go first, and then Paul can back up my story with a greater story. I would say one of the like frequent blood noses that we've had over time around developing leaders is kind of the you give them all of this expectation and responsibility, and to James's point, without guardrails or without guidance. And if there's no guardrails and guidance, it's kind of like you're expecting them to play footy without telling them how to play, or what the scoreboard is, or what the rules are. And it's just a really common scenario where, and I don't know, maybe James can file this away to talk about it later, but it's kind of the difference when you've got someone who's an outstanding salesperson, outstanding engineer, and they're an A player, but then you naturally think that every A player has to be a leader. And it's not always that way. An A player could just be a really superstar project engineer, and they just want to stay in that space. So sometimes the first one is you give them responsibility without guidance and guardrails. So I've done those. Abdicated, like that's a great one. So sometimes you just go, right, you're in charge, and then you kind of off you go. Like it's BYO, it's you know, it's your IKEA flat pack, however you want to build it. And it like values change, culture change, processes change. And then you go, whoa, hang on. It's still got to be somewhat aligned to your culture and your vision and your direction. It's very easy for too much responsibility and suddenly you haven't kind of started. Because if you think about it, go back to an apprentice model. Like when you become an apprentice, and let's just say plumbing, like they don't get you started straight away on like unblocking everything. Like you're carrying the toolbox. And then the next step is maybe you're handing the tools and identifying the problems, but you're not deep diving. And so I would say there's plenty of mistakes that we've made in those kind of 3 scenarios where you've almost set someone up to fail in a leadership position. It's kind of like too much too early, and it really harms the individual, and it just doesn't lead them down the path of success. So I think that's a big issue that we've made ourselves. So I'm not even talking about other people. I'm saying that's something that we've done. Paul's got lots of stories that we've both experienced. So we almost have the same storybook. So I'll hand over to him.
Yeah, mine's slightly different because we've been around for 19 years, so you'll learn a lot, and we call that learning tax, is what we call it here internally. And we have paid plenty of learning tax over the years. As far as in our example, there was there is, and he's still with us, our tech lead of our senior project delivery team, or Azure Modern Work team, as we call it, not interested in being a leader at all. Like, didn't want to know about it, not so interested, you know. But the reality is his actions each and every day, he's super value aligned with us as an organization. He knows what's expected of him, and that's important for us to enable that through clear, you know, outcome profile definitions and all the rest. And what he does each and every day is what he's supposed to do. Now, that then allows his peers to see that and understand what good looks like. And because he knows what he's doing, he then will just inherently just mentor and help and coach other people. And that's the best kind of leadership you can sort of find, that when people are just doing it organically. But the minute we spoke to this particular guy and said, "Hey, I reckon you should be a leader of that team," he's like, "Whoa, hang on, I don't want to know about that." So he's been with us now for probably about 7 years, and over the years we've just sort of said it's not a stress, and be careful about what that next step or a team lead might mean. What is expected out of that person that was different to what was expected from them yesterday? If you're just careful with that, and they're okay and comfortable with that when they understand that, then if you're fortunate enough to pick a person that is organically or naturally doing that, that's a great outcome if you can find it. Not always possible, but a good example.
Cool. Okay, so I'm going to link back to James. You mentioned a second ago, or a few minutes ago, that manage numbers. So you manage the numbers, you lead people, right? So let's talk a little bit, Paul, you're touching on the difference there between a leader and a manager, right? And I certainly know this from, I promoted someone thinking that was the right thing into a management position at one point, and they got burnt out and they resigned, and it was a big sore lesson for me. That's one of my learning taxes. It does happen. James, can you sort of give us a little bit of detail as to why they're different? The difference between a manager and a leader.
Again, the way I compartmentalize, I say manage metrics. So whether that's numbers,
Yep.
it's ones, it's zeros, it's process. It's right or wrong a lot of the time, right? And you can manage that if someone's not doing the right activity. There's an correct solution to that. Then that needs to be managed effectively through learning, training, coaching, mentoring. But when I think of leadership, it's about leading your people. Like, how do you get that person motivated and inspired to come and do their best work? How do you get them excited to come in and contribute and deliver meaningful contributions? And how do you get more out of them than they thought was even possible out of themselves? And if you focus on just managing and say, "Hey, you're now," and as an example, Zorn talking about bringing in new managers or leaders, and I think guardrails. But if you come in and you say, this is the game that we're playing, I want you to go off and execute here, and I want you to lead, and I want you to manage, whatever that may be. I find that can be one directional, and the psychology of actually bringing someone in that position and actually helping and actually asking them to be part of the solution and actually contributing to the design of how that role is going to look moving forward, and to actually put thought process into it and feel like they have actually added meaningful contribution because they've been sitting there and observing, and internally or externally, they'll come in there more committed because it's their ideas that they're actually agreeing to sign up to. So you can create that again within your guardrails, but it's for me that leadership is this, I guess, the psychology is of motivating and inspiring and getting people bought in, that they see this not as a job, but as a lifestyle that allows them to do their life's work.
James, do you I want to just tag on Ben if it's all right. For you, James, a lot of what you showed, at least with Datto and what partners saw, was leadership became influence. So a lot of what that was, whether it was vision or direction, or what you spoke about with mastery, autonomy, and purpose in a role, like it seemed like the team rallied around vision, but they each had autonomy. Did you find that made such a big difference? Because obviously a lot of us, we don't want mistakes. To Paul's point, it's the nurses and kind of doctors thing. But without autonomy, people get held back. It's like they'll never do it as good as me, so I've got to kind of strangle them into perfection. But what we saw, at least with Datto, is there was a lot of autonomy. Did that start with you, or was that already there when you got there?
That well, I was the first employee in the country, so part of that was like my doing locally, but I also had a boss in America that said, hey, let me know what you need. Tell me what your plan is, and let me know what hurdles I can get out of the way for you. Just share with me what your goals and your vision is, and then we would collaborate. And he'd go like, "Great, go run it." Um, and I had that autonomy, and my personality is that I like that creativity, to be able to go out there and do that. However, I do remember times, and again, I can talk from a sales perspective, and it's, we can interchange it with roles, but I'd be doing a joint demonstration with a product demo or a presentation to a customer, and in my head, when I'm first doing this, bringing in a new rep, I'm like, I could do this a lot better than them. This is an important client. I should probably take over now. That takes a lot of willpower to actually hold back as much as you possibly can. And to Paul's point, it's not life and death that we're doing here. And you may walk away that he messed it up. And if he does, you can step in and recover it and just say, yeah, we're just learning through this. And usually the person on the other side is going to be understanding. But more often than not, you may go, you really impressed me. I really like the angle that you took there. I hadn't thought about that. And empowering them to think about how they want to do their role in that safe environment. And you work as a partnership, but yeah, I found it really tough to start with. You do want to jump in, and you do want to take control, and you need to kind of bite your tongue and sit on your hands a little bit, and just close your eyes and muffle your ears a little bit at first. But that's a lesson that once you realize how clever and capable most people are, on the whole, there's some that aren't so capable, but on the whole, you'll be pleasantly surprised. And I'd encourage everyone listening to think of a situation that you can put guardrails in place, give them a direction, give them a blank canvas, and tell them to go off and come back with a solution. And it's their solution, not yours. And then tell them, that looks great, go execute it. And you'll most likely be surprised at how much more bought in when they're running their playbook than try to execute theirs. Because the other piece to remember is our brains are all wired slightly differently. So there's different avenues to get to the same destination. One's not necessarily right or wrong.
Yeah, it's more than one way to scale a mountain.
Yes, bring that back around to where Ben started, difference between sort of leadership and management. I think, James, what you've done historically, leadership is very personal. Like it's human to human, it's person to person. Whereas management, as you say, is much more metrics driven, and you've done it or you haven't, and that should be clear, assuming you've told the person what's expected of them. I guess as IT people, the social components of us as people isn't necessarily as strong as it is when compared to the average person out on the street. So if someone is a very strong technical person, then their leadership or their that social component of that leadership can sometimes be a challenge. And it's important that we know our people as well as we can. It doesn't mean you need to be their best friend, but certainly, at least in a professional manner, if you understand the person, you understand what might be happening in their world, and you understand how that may be affecting their performance at work, I think that they're still really important things to consider. And that goes back to the leadership part, I think.
There's a saying that I heard not too long ago, which was, people don't remember what you said, they remember how you made them feel.
Absolutely. Yep.
Very true. Very true. Okay, so I think that's a good sort of wrap up, the difference between sort of a manager and a leader. And Paul, you sort of touched on, the technical leadership, and the downside of our industry. We've got introverted personalities and things like that, and there's nothing wrong with that. And
Sure.
James, you mentioned that everyone's different, and I think that in that mind, we can have great leaders that aren't a manager, right? They can be leading the technical team. They may not necessarily be a leader in title, but you can certainly be a leader without the manager title as well. I want to flip gears a little bit, because I know that we've got, and this will be shared as a resource as well to, aspiring leaders. What advice would you give to the others on, the other side? So we've talked a lot about developing leaders from a business sense, but for those people that are listening to this at a later date that want to be a leader themselves, what tips would you give them? Dawn, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I think that's an important question, Ben, because it's very difficult to lead others if you're not first leading yourself. And kind of, we were talking briefly before we started, like just how your tank is. Like if you're in deficit, or if you're not at the level you need to be to lead, it's hard to lead others. So you can kind of leading people from a negative space. But I would say if you're on that journey yourself, it's really, I don't think people go, oh, I want to be a leader, and that's a defined outcome. I think maybe the question to ask yourself is perhaps slightly different, is what's the impact you're looking to make? So, or what's the influence you're hoping to have, or what's the outcome you're hoping to achieve? It's kind of like the byproduct of those items help you, many cases, arrive at that destination. So, but there's lots of great resources, lots of great books that people can read, TED Talks. I would say one of the things that you have to really identify is how do you spend time with those that you would most like to become, whether it's a leadership trait, a character trait. So how are you surrounding yourselves with someone slightly further ahead than you? I mean, Paul and I have had the fortune to do that in peer groups. There's plenty of great leaders in the channel, in the community, and events as well. Like events play a role. Like even peers you work with. I mean, I've been fortunate to witness some amazing leadership journeys from people who started as graduates to become CEOs, and like kind of front row popcorn watching those people develop. And a lot of that has been kind of what Paul said before. It seemed organic from the outside, but it was very deliberate on the inside. They got exposure to others, they got mentoring, they got training, they got, development. And so that became a huge kind of, I think, accelerator for their journey. But I wouldn't underestimate like how you learn from those around you. And so I would say if you're on that journey first, is who would you most want to help you get there? And how do you spend time with them? So in an organization, you might call it mentoring, you might call it advice, but how would you first find that person to start to guide you? Because I think you can drown in information online and still not have any insight. And, it's like, and then you consume too much and execute too little. So I would say kind of first thing to take away is who can you find to help you on that journey? Who can mentor you and guide you? And I think that's an important first step.
Great, thank you. Paul, any tips from your side for aspiring leaders?
Yeah, I would definitely roll back around to the human connection piece, which is really an extension of what Zorn started there. I genuinely believe I was not born a leader, that's for sure, but I have become a leader through what I do each and every day within our team. I have been coached by a lot of great people. Some are on this call, I see. And mentorship is super important. If you are able to just work with somebody who believes that they can help you, perhaps just have a talk to somebody and see if they are happy to get you where you're going. Sometimes that might be a professional paid engagement. Sometimes that might be somebody that that can help you out just on an ad hoc basis. And it's connecting with people. It's go to events, talk to people, get outside of your own world and talk to other people. I was contacted recently by somebody who works at an IT vendor talking to me about their personal or their professional development and what they should do. And yet I'm not in that organization. I'm just a person that I guess has been around for a long time. I talk to a lot of people. So they were keen on understanding what my viewpoint was. So being open, opening yourself and being willing to speak to people and connect with people, it returns, right? So then if people value what you've got to say as well, then they will, they will help guide you as well. So I think it's super important to connect with people and make sure that you're willing to put yourself out there a little bit and be open to learning.
Great. James, any tips from your side?
Yeah, I personally agree with both Zorn and Paul. They're both really, really good tips. And I've got a tip, and I'll share a story of how I got there. So when I was I was leading the Dado team, I stepped from being an individual contributor to a manager to a leader, and all of a sudden my team were doing these really awesome deals. And part of me in the early days, and this is even in my first management job at Enable, and I actually was the one that did the deals. I was there, then they booked it and it was in their name. And I was worried at the time that like I'm not going to get the recognition for actually executing on the task at hand. But the reality is that my boss over in the States, and this could be your customers here, they're going to hold as the boss, the leader, the MD, they're going to hold you accountable for the results. So it doesn't, but you are actually incentivized to build the highest performing team that you can, even if you're not getting the individual contribution for the task at hand. If you can build up an army of experts in your business, when you go to exit, sell, get awards, everyone's going to be looking at you as the business owner or as the MD. So bringing that back down, what I would encourage to your question, Ben, is what can those that are aspiring to leadership or management do? One tip that I would share is think about how you can selflessly help others around you in your team and out of your team to deliver outstanding results for them, not you, completely selflessly. And if you can help everyone around you, then that is, for me, what true leadership is. It's about getting others around you to perform at their best. And you do not need a manager title to do that. You could be the most junior person in the business, but you can most likely add value to others. Just don't go asking for a gold star. If you've done it, do it selflessly. And you will soon get noticed and recognized as someone that is adding incremental value over and above the job at hand.
There's a great quote from Zig Ziglar. I think, James, I don't know if you remember it. It was like, you can have whatever you want in this life if you help enough other people get what they want first. And it kind of embodies that principle of serving and helping others, because that's kind of the leadership diet. The leadership diet is not what you consume. It's what you help others with. It's kind of like, that's the opposite of it, because it's people, right? And there are coaches, mentors, even consultants and advisors. I would encourage people, like, think outside the box when it comes to starting that journey, but try and be deliberate. Try and be deliberate, because many of those things don't happen by accident.
Yeah, cool. All right, so let's shift to leadership teams or management teams a little bit, right? So we're going to flip back to the sort of the maybe the owner side of things, but knowing that we've got various size MSPs, right? At what point do you create a formal leadership team and designate formal leaders within your organizations? Call it managers, management teams. At what size did each of you create that? And I know, Zorn, you had a couple of business partners, same with you had your brother Paul, but what size did that expand? Paul,
I do think that's actually a little different between having a partnership with two or more people versus a single owner. I think it'd be quite challenging as a single owner, and I believe you'd have a different answer. But in my circumstance, when there were myself and my brother as owners and both operational in the business, you can stretch quite a while with just the two of you leading that. Now, is that the smartest thing to do? Probably not, because you do need to get out of your own way and trust in other people and guide them. But it took us so long to realize that, oh, we're leaders. That's right. Oops. So you've got to realize that. You've got to then get appropriate learning and coaching development for yourself, so that you know how to help that next level leaders, right? Because it doesn't magically happen. We certainly invested heavily in making sure that we knew what to do. Now, back to when, I think that's tough. I would have thought probably, I don't know, maybe 5 million rev, somewhere around there as far as the dollar figure goes. Maybe Zorn can help me out there and maybe provide a more accurate answer. But
Are you talking, Ben, around a management team, or like leading functions? Is that what you're kind of referring to?
well, yeah. I mean, if you think of, we've talked previously on MSPs in conversation around business frameworks. A lot of us know the EOS framework in terms of leadership team. Others may know it as a management team. Those sort of things. But when are we adding a dedicated team into place that I think call it a leader or a manager?
Yeah. So, slightly different take on it. I think you add it in at the point that you're planning for it. So why do I say that? Is like, a lot of the mistakes that we made was leaving things too late, and so we left it too late. We didn't, or it was burning, and then we're like, oh my gosh, we need a manager, we need a leader. And it wasn't necessarily like, oh, this is a textbook playbook example of how to build a team. That's why we've got James on the call. So, but for us, it was like, okay, hang on. Now we were doing too much. So I think to Paul's point, if you're an owner and you're at the point of like you can't take a break or you can't get away or decisions don't get made without you, I would say that's kind of the point of asking yourself the question, like, is it time to start creating responsibility outside the leader and the owner? And so for us, yeah, that was kind of actually how we decided by starting with, we don't want to be operational in these areas. So like the sales team, for example, we started adding people to the sales team so that I wasn't the one doing quotes and going and seeing clients every day. For service, it wasn't Lee doing tickets or projects. And so we kind of built it from there. But the plan was around giving us capacity. And then that became kind of the starting point. I wouldn't, to Paul's point, advocate that's best practice. So, but I would say, like, where's your plan personally? Because I think our story is we left a lot of those things too late. And the MSPs I have witnessed accelerate and kind of go faster have been really deliberate. And oftentimes, like, and I saw this a few years ago with a firm that Paul and I know that built a security practice. Their first hire was the leader, not a security person, an engineer, or anything else. That was their first hire. And then they built the team around the leader because the leader, to James's earlier point, got the playbook and they said, you build it, you create it. Like, and so they started with the leader, which again, not all of us have the money and funds when we're starting our MSPs to do that. But if you can, I think that's a great place to begin. But maybe that's a good segue for James to kind of enlighten us all, because he's had a few go rounds.
James, you and I were having a very similar conversation recently, actually. What do you suggest for, in the size of MSP? What's the right time for the average business?
I don't think there's a right or wrong answer, or there's not a magic number here. It depends. There's a lot of variances. It depends on like size today, growth goals, ambitions, budget, etc. Yeah, look, from a on one hand, from a sales perspective or from a team perspective, I think that dedicated manager, eight is a good number if you've got 8 people in that team. Again, if you've got 2 to 3 techs, then you're probably going to need a hybrid role of someone that's still hands on the tools as well as managing and leading. But I think the conversation that we were having, Ben, was on particularly on sales leadership. And a conversation that I've had with a number of MSPs recently is they've got an appetite. I'm going to give a use case. They want to sell their business and they need to get their revenue up and their recurring revenue up, and then they increase and build a sales engine, because that combination gives a greater multiplier, business valuation multiplier in the eyes of investors. So they come and say, I want a unicorn. I want a head of revenue or a sales leader, but I also want that person to go out and do business development. But we don't have any leads, so they need to come with a Rolodex and actually go out there and do door knocking and bring them in. And from a sales perspective, I think it's highly, highly unlikely that you're going to find that unicorn. And even if you find someone that says that they are, there's massive risk in it. If we talk sales leadership, there's likely to be the capacity to do 2 of those things. If you can be a sales leader and then manage the BDM, but you need leads coming in, or you can hire a BD person there's just to execute and do some lead generation themselves, but they're not going to be that leader in actually implementing sales processes and methodology. So depending on what your objectives are, it may be a 2-person job out of the gate, and that may mean that you need a plan for that budget early on. So that's important. I would say seek counsel from people that have done it before, and understand what works and what hasn't. And again, there's not it's one way or the other. It's going to be circumstantial based on your current situations, but there's not a lot of unicorns out there. So maybe just compartmentalize skill sets and outcomes that you're looking for, and find the right people for what each of those objectives.
Okay, so let's say that we've got a potential leader in that that has the spark internally. how quickly should we, you know, and I go back to the mistake that I made once upon a time, how quickly should we move them along that journey? Paul?
So
James, yeah. No, please.
Go for it, James. Go.
I was just going to share another story. There's an MSP that we're working with, and the CEO said, I've been doing the CEO and the business development. I'm tired. I want out. I don't want to manage anyone. And I think this comes back. We had a conversation. I was like, do you not want to manage people, or you don't want to lead them? For here, the leadership is not managing their metrics and pipeline and appointment setting, etc. You can have an operations person to inspect that. However, you as the CEO, you're the visionary. You should be the one that is actually mentoring and supporting that.
Mm-hmm.
If you've got, for example, a commercial person, BD, head of revenue, whatever that is, that's being lined up, I really think that you need to be joined at the hips from a vision perspective. You need to get to know each other probably over a 12-month period and ensure that you're compatible and aligned on the vision moving forward. It doesn't mean that you've got to manage them. You shouldn't. If you're bringing someone in at that level, you shouldn't be managing them, but you should be leading them on the vision and what you see as the future. Sorry, Paul.
A quote from David Vidos in the chat that talks about the whole EOS, GWC, gets it once it has the capacity to do it as well, right? So for those of you that follow EOS, Paul, what's your take on it? You think 12 months is a good amount of time? Would you go quicker? Would you go harder? Would you go way longer?
Timing's one thing. Making sure that person's been set up for success is probably another, because it doesn't matter how much time you give somebody. If they haven't been enabled well to succeed, then it's going to be disastrous and probably quickly. If I look back at, again, some learnings, if I think about a BDM example, try to, oh, great, I need a BDM, I need to grow. Well, that's simple, just hire a BDM. As it turns out, that's not all you need. So enablement around any role. So have you got lead gen coming in? So who's doing lead gen? And have you got marketing to support the lead gen? Like, there is so many other steps that you need to look strategically at enablement. I am still an owner-led sales organization, and because I almost arguably at the point where I genuinely believe I'm enabled to get a BDM. But I've learned that when I had tried it in the past, I was certainly not ready. So that person was definitely going to fail. So enablement is super key and important. Now, if that person, if we sort of transition that to then talk about a sales manager, arguably I'm also the sales manager in my organization. So you need to consider, if I was going to go and look for a sales manager, have I enabled that person? Do they understand? Are we budgeting as a business? Have we got targets? Does the sales manager know what those targets are? Do they have resources in their team? If they're a sales manager, they must have a team of resources to go and actually achieve a target. So I think that sort of stuff is super important. So clarity of role, professional development to enable people to make sure that and I'm going to steal, I think it's your line, James, or I might have heard it from you first. Inspect what you expect out of that person or that role, and make sure they have the mentorship and coaching along the way. They need to be thinking above themselves and above their role. They need to look cross-functionally across an organization. If they're a sales manager, they need to know what service do. They need to know finance parts to a certain degree that's appropriate about what's happening in the business. They can't just look in their own space. They need to be able to look beyond. And I do think coming back to culture is super important. So are they aligned with the culture of the organization? Because if they're in any leadership role, and if they're not aligned from a cultural perspective, then I can't see how it could possibly work.
That kind of leads me to my next question, actually. So I guess, in terms of, that sounds very much around, both of your answers very much around trust, time, making sure they're set up for success, and that realistically isn't done overnight. And I know that I've made that mistake previously. I've dropped a few people into leadership and just gone, oh, cool, you're that role now, you're sales manager, you're just going to get it. No, it doesn't happen like that. We all stumble, right? I love the saying that, we crawl before we walk, and we walk before we run. But going back to the leadership team aspect of it, there's different types of leaders out there, different types of leadership styles and things like that. So how important do you think it is to have diverse leadership styles in a business? Zorn?
I think you're missing a beat if you don't. I think if you employ everyone that looks like you, smells like you, sounds like you, you're actually penalizing yourself. I think you're actually putting yourself behind when you start. And I think unfortunately it's very easy when you're hiring or recruiting or promoting to kind of you get enamored with those that most reflect you in the mirror. And so you have to look past. I mean, there's a whole science on actually recruiting people blind now, where no names, kind of no voice. And so you are doing, and they've done lots of tests around this. There's some great books around kind of that blind hiring. But I would say for diversity, you need actually someone. You talked about Spark, Ben. I think a great role of a leader is to challenge. Like to James's point when he was talking before around there's more than one way to get a job done or more than one way to scale a mountain. If a leader, like diversity allows different thinking, different perspective, but also it should challenge your thinking, because if everyone is just saying yes to you, have you really got a leadership team? Because it could be just a dictatorship. And I think there's a line as MSPs where we do kind of don't always see that. And maybe I'll pick on service because we're having lots of sales conversations. But if people aren't challenging somewhere in an organization and like they're not looking at different ways of doing things, different thoughts, that's going to hurt the organization and its competitiveness. So I think it's critical that you have that diversity. It's not the easiest thing to do in our organization, but I think it's a challenge that every MSP needs to take on.
Paul or James? Diversity. What do you say? I guess maybe James, I'll throw it to you actually. What did you do in your, Datto and those organizations when how important was making sure you had different opinions, etc.?
I'll answer this in a couple of ways. I truly believe that diversity is critical, and diversity drives innovation particularly within a leadership team. So having different perspectives that come in and contribute to new ways of thinking and challenging the status quo is absolutely going to drive innovation. So that's one piece. If I flip back and say, building sales teams as an example, I had a job at hand to build a business from the ground up, and we needed a particular profile of sales rep. And the profile that I was looking for, that I have a framework and I can recite it. It's IQ, and so intelligence, EQ, emotional intelligence, drive. How driven are they? How inquisitive or curious are they? And how much of a culture fit are they as well? So when I was hiring people, like over and above necessary experience, I was looking for core characteristics. And I knew that if someone was smart and driven and coachable and inquisitive, then that was what was most likely going to put them in a position to be successful. And I would say if there's 5 of those there, if they had 3 out of 5, I would give them a pass. And if they had 4, I'd preferably go for 5, but I'd hire on 4 if one of them was not there. So for me, at that point in time, like that was what we needed to do to build the business. But from a leadership perspective today, having diversity is absolutely important and going to drive innovation. So would definitely encourage it.
Okay. We've got a question in the chat, and then I'll probably have my last question for you guys as well, so we can wrap up. But from Tony says, and this is a term that's going around a lot at the moment, what is the group's thought on using fractional leadership where the owner doesn't want to, or potentially, maybe they can't afford a full-time leader? And I know there's a lot of fractional leaders, whether it be marketing or sales or whatnot. Paul, I'm going to throw that one to you.
Yeah, absolutely. I've certainly engaged in a variety of sort of skilled professionals in different areas. So I absolutely see value in getting somebody smarter than me to help me with the things that I need to learn. I think, if you don't know somebody, you just you might come across them at an event and have a chat, and they might sound like, well, that guy was awesome, that guy or girl, they magically know everything that I want to know. chances are they've been coached or educated by somebody else. Because once again, I wasn't born a leader, that's for sure. So we've used strategic people external to the business. We've used fractional marketing people, finance people external. So we've looked at quite an array of different skill sets, because myself and my business partner, my brother Robert, we were not good at a lot of those things. So we brought in external skills to support us. Now, it's important that you learn from that. It's not, I don't believe just outsourcing it is a great idea. You need to get the right people to coach you and to help you learn that skill set that you don't know. I guess one option is to have somebody forever. It's probably not a great idea, because you're not developing yourself personally or professionally. Not to say that these don't tend to be short-term engagements. We'll tend to partner with an organisation for quite some time, and I go about finding those people by talking to other people. Funnily enough, once again, it's a relatively close-knit community, the IT community in Australia. A lot of people know a lot of people. And I'm certainly always willing to talk to others, as Zorn is and James is. I'm sure like that's the nature of how you find great people to work with. It's go and talk to some peers and see. Again, I think whether it was James or Zorn that said, have a look at someone who you'd like to be like, and talk to them about how they got there and who helped them along the way. Maybe they can help you themselves, or maybe they can at least put you in contact with, if they had a particular outsource provider that supported their journey.
Okay. Zorn or James, anything quickly to add to that?
No, I think that's a pretty good, James.
Yeah, just I think that on one hand, there's a place for consultancy, but there's also a lot of snake oil out there. So being able to understand, like particularly from a sales perspective, where I've seen MSPs fall over is hiring a fractional salesperson for a period of time that isn't held accountable to numbers. And they're kind of high level without actually getting into the weeds, and it's quite difficult. So, I think you need to think about, if it's sales, what are you delivering? Are you delivering strategy or tactics? And pick one or the other, but you're unlikely to get fractional doing both, because it's a big job to be able to do both. So, but I would say it's important to set, objectives, KPIs, milestones that are inspected on a frequent basis, and the right person can add a lot of value to your business. But it's important that you truly understand what you're looking for. Otherwise, you may get 6 months down the line and not get anything.
Yep, I think that's very valid, and I've certainly made a few of those mistakes over the years myself. So, and I'm sure a few people on the call have as well. Guys, we're nearly at time, but I just want to ask one last thing. You guys, you're leaders within the industry in general. How do you continue? And very quickly, if I can get from each of you, how do you keep staying relevant as leaders? How do you keep learning? James, I'll ask you first.
I've recently put myself into my own business, and I am absolutely loving learning just everything. So for me, I was kind of a bit bored just doing the same thing repetitively. So for me, I actually feel refreshed and inspired, even just learning to do things like using Xero or sending out an invoice. But it's always like, how can you learn a new skill set that's relevant to the area that you're operating in? That's what I'm trying to do.
Zorn?
I think for me, the place I'm always challenged and learn and grow is in peer groups, like the Evolve kind of HEG peer group. Like that has always been the best area, because I've been able to witness, experience, get smacked around the head, like from that experience. And I think there's so many good peer groups out there. It's definitely a resource that you can also invest your team in. So not only developing yourself, but developing those in your team. And I think that makes a meaningful difference to me. So I continue to find that is an area where I get growth and challenge. And every new business you see is another example of a different leadership style or approach that you can learn from.
I agree with that. Yeah, absolutely. I think it's super important to keep an open mind and maintain a little bit of humility about yourself. Like, you don't know everything, regardless of how great you might be doing. There's always someone that's smashing out of the park way beyond you. So there are plenty of people to learn from. And I certainly know I don't know it all. And I enjoy speaking to other people and learning how they've how they've been successful. I 100% agree with Zorn and peer groups. For me, that made the biggest single difference in our growth journey and our realization. And I think we traveled along for about 7 years in our own little bubble, and that was a pretty ordinary 7 years. Then we joined a Vol peer group, and that's kind of the beginning of where things changed. So that was super important. Yeah, be open to learning.
Cool. Well, guys, thank you very, very much for all of your insights today. Like I mentioned, we will send out the recording, and we'll have a list of resources. So if anyone has any questions about whatnot, stay tuned for that. We do have our next MSPs in conversation coming up on the 27th. So we've talked a little bit today around managing numbers and whatnot. So the next topic we're talking about is how well do you understand the financial health of your MSP? So key metrics and insights for success. So that'll be quite an interesting one. And if you haven't checked it out already, MSPs in Conversation now has its own website. So check out mspsinconversation.com. All of our episodes are up there, and as will this be in the next couple of days. So again, Zorn, Paul, James, thank you so much for joining us today and offering all of your insights, and to all of the audience on the call today. I appreciate everyone's time, and hopefully you get to walk away with a couple of light bulb moments. Thanks again, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.